You can smell the smoke before you see the fire. Dust hangs thick in the dry, dead air over Jerusalem, and a fire that will consume the rot. Most people assume the prophets of the Hebrew Bible carry only one tone of voice, and the overwhelming reality of his affection literally renders the warrior speechless. He refuses to speak their past into the present. He will not bring up the idolatry. He will not list the betrayals. The God of the universe stands in the rubble of your failures, looks at you, and for a moment, he simply has no words. First comes the deafening silence of grace. Then comes the violent, ringing Rinna of joy. This two-part reaction, the stunned silence followed by the euphoric shout, changes the entire landscape of the prophet's message. It reveals a God whose ultimate goal was never retribution, but restoration. But if this is the climax of the scroll, if the story ends with a silenced accusation and a shout of fierce joy, why do so many of us still feel like we are staring down the barrel of a loaded weapon? You walk into a sanctuary. You sit down in a wooden pew. You hear the thin paper pages turning. You feel a knot tighten in your stomach. You know exactly what you brought into the room with you. You know the corners you cut. You remember the promises you broke. You remember the words you weaponized. You see the chaos you created in your own life. You expect the warrior to act like a prosecutor. You expect the list. You expect the lecture. You expect the disappointment. Most of us are haunted by the phantom of an angry judge. They imagine a deity pacing the floors of heaven, jaw clenched, breathing heavy, waiting for the perfect excuse to strike a match and burn the whole. We have been conditioned to read the biblical text defensively. We flinch before we are struck. We think the silence of God is just the deep breath a disappointed parent takes before the shouting begins. We think the quiet is a tactical pause. The silence is not a tactical pause. It is a shattered accusation. But we do not believe it. You try to fix the damage yourself. You try to rebuild the walls. You try to sweep up the ash. You think if you just work hard enough, you can earn back the affection you lost. You treat repentance like a transaction. You treat grace like a loan you have to pay back with interest. You assume the creator of the universe is standing on a distant hill, arms crossed, holding a clipboard, waiting for you to clean up your own wreckage. You carry this phantom anxiety in your jaw. You feel the heavy, oppressive weight of it in your chest. You smell the smoke of a fire that isn't even burning anymore. But Zephaniah is tearing down the phantom. He is telling you that the gibber is already standing in the ash. He is already in the deepest, most shattered center of your life. Human experiment down. They read these ancient texts and assume the God of the Old Testament is simply a frustrated judge who has finally run out of patience. He is not holding a clipboard. He is not tapping his foot. He is looking at the mess. He is looking at the broken limestone and the burnt cedar of your mistakes. And he chooses Chirash. He chooses not to read the charges. Then, he chooses Rinna. He chooses the ringing, piercing shout of absolute joy, because the chaos did not claim you, because you are still here, because the battle to reach you is finally over. It feels impossible to believe. It feels too radical, too gentle for the God of the ancient world. We assume this must be an isolated metaphor, a rare moment of poetic license hidden at the back of the minor prophets. But the warrior's reaction does not stop in Zephaniah. Centuries later, a rabbi sitting in the dirt of first-century Palestine would tell a story. He would describe a ruined rebel, a dusty road, and a patriarch who breaks every cultural rule to do the exact same thing. A crowd sits on the dry grass of a Galilean hillside. The rabbi from Nazareth is speaking to a mixed audience of rigid religious leaders and despised tax collectors. And he decides to tell a story. He tells a story about a boy who demands his inheritance early. And if you read the first 2 chapters of Zephaniah, it is very easy to see why that assumption exists. The text does carry that terrifying weight, leaves his family, and squanders every copper coin in a distant, gentile land. The boy builds a life out of chaos, and eventually, the chaos collapses directly on top of him. A severe famine strikes. The money runs dry. The boy ends up feeding pigs, smelling of rot and mud, his stomach completely hollow with hunger. He decides to go back. As he walks the long, dusty road toward his village, he rehearses his apology. He builds his own list of charges, whispering them to himself to make sure he gets the words right. "Father, I have sinned against heaven, and before you, I am no longer worthy to be called your son." He expects the angry judge. He expects the crossed arms, the deep sigh, the lecture on responsibility. But while he is still a long way off, an old man sees him, in the ancient Middle East, and sacrificing every ounce of cultural dignity. But this father does not care about the optics of the village. He kicks up a cloud of white dust, sprinting down the dirt road toward the stench of the pig pen. He throws his arms around the boy. He kisses him, and then the boy tries to read the charges. He begins his rehearsed speech of failure, confessing his sin against heaven and his unworthiness to be a son. There is judgment. There is fire. There is a cosmic unraveling. But if you look closer, if you wait out the violent storm of the first 2 chapters, but the father cuts him off. He refuses to let the boy finish the sentence about becoming a hired servant. He turns to his servants and demands a robe, a ring, and sandals. The father silences the accusation. He chooses Charash. He looks at the broken, humiliated rebel covered in foreign dirt, and his love literally cancels out the indictment before it can fully materialize in the air. The father's sprint is not a loss of dignity. It is the Gibbor charging into the rubble to reclaim what is his. And what happens next? The father does not send the boy to the washroom. He does not put him on a probationary period. He slaughters the fattened calf. He hires musicians. He throws a feast so loud, so overwhelming, that the older brother can hear the heavy rhythm of the dancing from way out in the fields. It is the Rinna. It is the piercing, uncontainable shout of joy over the one who was dead and is now alive again. Jesus is not inventing a new, softer theology on that hillside in Luke 15. He is simply putting flesh and blood on the ancient warrior of Zephaniah. But if this is the reality of who God is, if the warrior really responds to our ruin with silenced charges and a ringing shout, how are you supposed to walk back into the wreckage of your own life and arrive at the very climax of the entire scroll? You start to see something the angry judge, reading, completely ignores. The fire stops. The smoke clears. And the entire biblical narrative snaps into focus. A prophet stares at a corrupt city on the brink of collapse, and a warrior steps into the ashes. The day of the Lord shakes the pillars of the earth, and the chaos is finally extracted from the people. A battle-hardened veteran stands in the center of the ruins and deliberately drops the charges. A terrified remnant braces for the lecture of the judge and encounters the deafening silence of grace. A deity surveys the wreckage of a rebellious nation and tears the quiet apart with a ringing shout of uncontainable joy. A famished rebel rehearses his failures on a dusty road, and a patriarch sprints through the dirt to cut off the apology. The creator of the universe steps into the very center of your deepest shame and refuses to speak your past into your present. One warrior, one rescue, one song. But here is the part I keep coming back to. The white limestone covered in the thick, bitter soot of our own making. We spend our lives terrified that God is standing at the edge of the smoke, waiting for us to choke. We think his presence in our mess is a threat. It is not a threat. It is an extraction. If you are in a season where you are endlessly rehearsing your own failures, waiting for the judge to finally hand down the sentence you think you deserve, if you are sitting, the climax of the prophecy is not a decree of destruction. It is a song. To feel the shock of this moment, to understand why a book in the rubble of a collapsed relationship or a shattered dream, holding your breath for the lecture. The Gibbor is already in your midst. He is not asking you to clean up the ash before he speaks. He is already there, dropping the charges and preparing to sing. If this reached something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted from trying to earn their way back into grace. Pray for us as we keep digging into these ancient texts. And may the God who fought his way through the dark to reach you. Silence your worst accusers with his love, and stand in the absolute center of your life with a shout of unconquerable joy. Drenched in the terrifying imagery of war ends the way it does. You have to zoom in on a single, astonishing verse. Zephaniah chapter 3. Verse 17 contains a portrait of God so intimate, so profoundly unexpected, that it rewrites the entire landscape of the text. It changes how you view the battlefield. It changes how you view the judge. And it completely changes what happens when the smoke finally clears. The white limestone walls of the city seem to vibrate with a low, relentless hum. It is the sound of approaching empires. But before you can hear the song, you have to understand the kind of warrior who is stepping into the ruins. We misunderstand the Hebrew prophets. We read their warnings. We tally their judgments. We feel the heavy, oppressive weight of their rhetoric. We picture a deity obsessed with rule-breaking. But the prophets are not doing what we think they are doing. When Zephaniah talks about the day of the Lord, he is tapping into a very specific, very ancient motif. It is the terrifying language of uncreation. Nations collapse, kings fall, walls crumble, the sun turns black, the stars drop, the oceans boil, the earth fractures. This is the day of the Lord. It echoes in Amos. It thunders in Isaiah. It shakes the ground in Joel. And it appears here, in Zephaniah, with a density that suffocates the reader. You can almost taste the metallic tang of blood in the air. You can hear the deafening, bone-rattling crack of collapsing stone. You can feel the heavy, suffocating heat of a world catching fire. We read these texts, and we recoil. We picture a God who has finally lost his temper. We imagine a divine tantrum snapping the pillars of the earth. We feel the heat of the fire and assume it is meant to destroy us. The fire is not a weapon of annihilation. The metallic clatter of bronze and iron, the heavy thud of a siege that is no longer a rumor on the horizon, but a reality at the gates. It is a tool of extraction. In the ancient Near Eastern mind, order is constantly under siege by chaos. Chaos is the corrupt king. Chaos is the merchant rigging the scales in the dark. Chaos is the violence bleeding into the city streets. Chaos is the economic system that crushes the vulnerable while the powerful sleep on beds of carved ivory. God hates the chaos. He hates what it does to his creation. He hates how it breaks the people he loves. So he steps in. The skies darken. The wind howls. The mountains shake. The false systems we built begin to snap under their own weight. The day of the Lord is not a day of divine rage against humanity. It is a rescue mission disguised as a catastrophe. It is God tearing down the scaffolding of a corrupt world so he can reach the people trapped underneath it. When Zephaniah writes his first 2 chapters, he is painting with these dark, terrifying colors. He describes a sweep. He describes a cleansing. He describes a world scraped all the way down to the bedrock. The wealthy weep. The powerful howl. The cities burn. And usually, this is exactly where we stop reading. We close the book. We walk away. We think we know exactly who this God is. A man stands in the center of the market square, his sandals covered in ash, refusing to flinch. His name is Zephaniah. We categorize him as a punisher, a destroyer, a distant, terrifying force of nature holding a lightning bolt. But the text does not end in the ash. Chapter 3 introduces a violent pivot. The fire stops. The smoke begins to clear. The heavy, grinding noise of judgment fades into an eerie, ringing silence. Someone is standing in the center of the scorched earth. The ash settles over the broken limestone walls of Jerusalem. The streets are completely silent, emptied of the corrupt officials and the dishonest merchants who triggered the collapse. A small, exhausted remnant of the people cowers in the rubble, choking on the smoke, waiting for the final blow to land. Then, a figure steps through the dust. Zephaniah chapter 3. Verse 17 opens with a declaration that shifts the entire emotional gravity of the scroll. The prophet writes, "The Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. The English translation is polite. It feels safe. But the Hebrew is holding a sword. The word your Bible translates as mighty one or warrior is the Hebrew gibor. It is a word dripping with the mud and blood of ancient combat. A gibor is a champion, a battle-hardened veteran, the most lethal and unrelenting fighter in the king's army. It comes from the root gabar, meaning to prevail, to overpower, to possess raw, dominating strength. He is a prophet of royal blood, tracing his lineage back to King Hezekiah. And right now, he is watching his own people pull themselves apart. It is the exact same word the biblical writers use to describe Goliath as he stalks the valley of Elah, his heavy bronze armor clanking with every step. It is the word used to describe King David's elite fighting men, the ones who break through enemy lines with sheer, evulant force. A gibber is not a strategist who gives orders from a clean tent on a distant hill. A gibor is the one who steps into the center of the chaos when the defensive line collapses. When Zephaniah looks at the ruins of his city, he does not see a deity retreating to the heavens in disgust. He sees the gibor standing right in the middle of the wreckage. The Hebrew phrase for "in your midst" is bikurbaka, which literally translates to "in your inward parts" or "in your very center." God has not abandoned the broken city. He has fought his way through the chaos, through the siege, straight into the deepest, most shattered part of it. He is not a distant judge handing down sentences from a sterile throne. He is a warrior standing ankle-deep in the wreckage of your world. The people waiting in the rubble are holding their breath. They are staring up at the champion who just flattened the false systems they built. They can still smell the burning cedar and the ozone of the storm. They expect the conqueror to act like a conqueror, from the inside out. He is watching leaders take bribes in the dark, watching merchants rig their scales, watching priests profane the sanctuary. They expect him to draw his weapon, read the list of their failures, and demand absolute submission from the survivors. But a detail is hiding in the second half of the verse. It is a detail that completely subverts. He does not demand tribute. He opens his mouth, and the sound that comes out is impossible. We read the English translations of Zephaniah 3:17, and our modern minds immediately soften the edges. We see the phrase, "He will exult over you with loud singing." We picture a lullaby. We imagine a parent humming, a quiet, soothing melody to a frightened child in the dark. We take the terrifying, blood-stained warrior of the previous chapters and we turn him into a gentle poet. We domesticate the text. But the language here is not safe. The word the English translators render as loud singing or gladness is the Hebrew rinna. Rinna is not a lullaby. It is a ringing, piercing cry. It is a sound that vibrates in the chest and echoes off the stone. The social fabric of the city is not just tearing. It is disintegrating. And so, he opens his mouth and speaks. In the ancient Hebrew world, this word was reserved for moments of overwhelming, uncontainable emotion. It is the sound a community makes when the famine finally breaks and the first rains hit the cracked dirt. It is the word used in Psalm 126. When the exiles return home from Babylon, those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. With rinna, it is the sound an army makes when they stand on a ridge, look down at the valley, and realize the invading forces have surrendered. It is the sound of an iron gate swinging open for a captive who forgot what daylight looks like. If hearing the Bible opened up like this is shifting something inside of you, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So, the warrior lifts his voice. The gibor stands in the ash of the city, looks at the broken people he just fought through hell to reach, and he lets out a rinna. He does not sigh in disappointment. He does not cross his arms in frustration. He does not hand them a list of the rules they broke. He shouts. His joy over his people is not a quiet sentiment. He delivers a message that feels like a physical blow, calling it the day of the Lord. He describes a day of wrath, a day of distress. It is a violent, ringing declaration of victory. The chaos has been defeated. The systems that crush them have been leveled. The distance between the creator and the created has been closed. And his immediate, visceral reaction is to tear the silence apart, with a shout of absolute, conquering delight. But the shout is only half the story, because right before the Rinna shakes the ground, the Hebrew text does something incredibly strange. Before the warrior sings, he stops. And he does something that most English Bibles completely mistranslate. The survivors cowering in the ruins brace for the lecture. The stone floor beneath their feet is still warm from the fire, and the bitter smell of burning cedar is thick in their throats. They know exactly why the city was dismantled. They remember the rigged scales in the marketplace, the bribes taken in the shadows, the innocent blood spilled in the streets. As the mighty warrior steps into their midst, they expect him to unroll the scroll of their offenses. They expect him to list every single failure out loud. But look at the phrase right before the shout in verse 17. Most English Bibles translate this moment as, "He will quiet you with his love," or "He will rest in his love." It sounds gentle, like a parent hushing a crying infant in a nursery, and anguish. A day of ruin and devastation. A day of darkness and gloom. He describes a storm that will sweep away the wicked. The word Zephaniah actually uses is the Hebrew karash. It does not mean to soothe someone else into resting. It means to be utterly, completely silent yourself, to become completely speechless, to deliberately hold your tongue and refuse to speak. The subject of the verb is God. God is the one who goes quiet. To understand why this is so radical, you have to look at how sharash functions. It appears over 70 times in the Hebrew Bible, often describing a person who deliberately chooses to ignore an insult or withhold a justified response. When King Saul's enemies openly despise him and refuse to bring him presents, the text says, Saul held his peace. He chose karash. He chose not to retaliate with words. Many Hebrew scholars point out that in an ancient courtroom, or the immediate aftermath of a military conquest, the victor always speaks the guilt of the conquered out loud. It is the moment the prosecutor formally reads the charges. But the Gibbor stands in the ashes of Jerusalem, looks at the broken people, and he drops the charges. His silence is not a lingering disappointment. It is an absolute, stunning acquittal. The prophet says he is silent in his love, Be'ahavato. He looks at the people he just tore down the world to save. A patriarch with land and wealth does not run. It requires pulling up the heavy fabric of the tunic, exposing the legs. What a Gibbor is supposed to do after the battle is finally won. The warrior does not raise a sword.